The cab rolled to a stop on a narrow Chicago street, its tires crunching against scattered bits of broken glass. Emma pressed her forehead to the window and let out a shaky breath. She had waited months for this moment, imagining the comfort of living with Daniel, of finally having a place to call theirs. But now, as she stared at the weather-stained brick building, a current of unease crept under her skin. Daniel rushed forward, smiling, arms wide as he grabbed the first of her boxes. "You made it," he said, kissing her forehead. Emma smiled, though her voice carried a tremor. "Of course. This is home now, right?" The word home lingered in the air, fragile, almost uncertain. The elevator groaned as it carried them upward. Emma leaned against the peeling metal walls, watching Daniel's face light up with plans for their future. He talked about where the couch would go, how she could paint the spare room, and how their life would finally feel real. She nodded along, forcing herself to match his excitement, though her heart raced. The door to his apartment opened with a metallic click. A rush of stale air hit her, dust, faint cigarette smoke, and something sharper she couldn't place. She brushed it off, eager to settle in. Daniel set her boxes down and wrapped his arms around her. For a moment, she let herself sink into his warmth. But as she unpacked, something shifted. The neighbors across the hall stood watching. An older woman with heavy eyes and a thin mouth lingered too long before retreating into her unit. Emma caught Daniel's glance, but he ignored it, forcing a grin. "Don't mind them," he muttered. "They're just nosy." Hours passed, in a blur of cardboard and laughter. Emma pulled out photo frames, books, and small keepsakes that marked her life before Daniel. She felt a strange comfort setting them on his shelves, weaving herself into the fabric of his home. He watched her with soft eyes, occasionally stealing kisses, occasionally cracking jokes to make her laugh. Yet beneath it all, there was an undercurrent she couldn't shake. Daniel's phone buzzed on the table. Once, then again, then again. Each time he silenced it quickly. Emma raised an eyebrow. "Who keeps calling?" He waved it off. "My mom, she's just worried, that's all." The tone of his voice was sharp enough to close the subject, but Emma caught the flicker of irritation in his eyes. As night fell, the city outside grew louder. Sirens echoed from blocks away, footsteps scurried in the hallway, and the radiator hissed like it was breathing. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, sipping cheap wine from a paper cup. Daniel sprawled beside her, telling stories of his childhood, baseball games in the park, broken arms, scraped knees. "Tomorrow," he whispered, brushing her hair from her face, "we'll wake up and it'll finally feel like we've started our life together." Emma smiled, but a knot twisted in her stomach. Something in his tone felt rehearsed, too perfect, as if he were trying to convince himself as much as her. Another knock rattled the door. Both froze. Daniel rose slowly and peered through the peephole. No one. Only the creak of the hallway pipes. He returned, forcing a laugh. "Old building. Everything echoes." But Emma's eyes drifted toward the door again, her heart pounding. When she finally lay in bed that night, she found herself staring at the ceiling, tracing cracks that spread like spiderwebs above her. Daniel slept soundly beside her, one arm draped across her waist. The city hummed in the distance, restless and alive, but inside the apartment there was only silence. Thick, pressing silence broken only by the occasional buzz of Daniel's, phone lighting up the nightstand. Emma turned away from it, pulling the blanket tighter around her. 12 hours. That's all it had been since she arrived, yet the air already felt different, charged, unsettled. She wanted to believe it was nothing more than nerves, nothing more than the ordinary anxiety of starting something new. But deep down, she sensed the walls of Daniel's Chicago apartment were holding secrets, and sooner or later they would bleed through. She closed her eyes, unaware that tomorrow's daylight would bring not comfort, but revelation, an unraveling, that would begin with a single photograph and end with truths neither of them were prepared to face. Morning light filtered through the cracked blinds, striping the walls in pale gold. Emma stirred first, rising quietly so as not to wake Daniel. She padded barefoot across the wooden floor, her arms wrapped tight against the morning chill. The boxes stacked in the corner seemed heavier than last night, as though their contents had grown with the weight of memory. She brewed coffee in the tiny kitchen, the smell rising like a small comfort in the cold apartment. Daniel appeared minutes later, his hair mussed, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He smiled when he saw her, though it was tired, guarded. "Morning," he murmured, kissing her temple. "Feels real now, doesn't it?" Emma nodded. "It does." They sat on the floor among boxes, sipping from mismatched mugs, pretending this morning was like any other couple's. But the silence between words was louder than the hum of the radiator. Emma filled it by talking about curtains, rugs, and how she wanted to hang some of her photos. Daniel agreed absently, already drifting in thought. Later, as Emma unpacked, she opened a small velvet pouch. Inside was a framed photograph she kept with her everywhere she moved. She smiled at it. Her younger self, no more than 6, standing beside a woman with long dark hair, holding her tightly. Emma's fingers brushed the glass before she placed it carefully on Daniel's bookshelf. Daniel, passing by with a stack of books, stopped. His body stiffened, his gaze narrowing on the photo. For a moment he forgot to breathe. The woman's face, it stirred something inside him. A flicker of memory, a courthouse hallway, raised voices, a shadow of someone who had been whispered about but never fully explained. Emma noticed his stare. "Something wrong?" she asked lightly, though her voice caught. Daniel forced a smile. "No, just nice picture." But the weight in his tone betrayed him. The rest of the afternoon dragged. Emma hummed while sorting her clothes into drawers. But Daniel's silence pressed against the air like a storm waiting to break. He sat on the couch, scrolling his phone without really looking at it, his mind circling back to the photograph, again and again. When Emma caught him glancing toward it for the 3rd time, she finally spoke. "You keep looking at that picture. Do you know her?" Daniel's throat tightened. He shrugged. "She just looks familiar, that's all." Emma's eyes softened. "That's my mom. She died when I was a kid." She paused, her tone protective. "Why?" Daniel hesitated. The resemblance gnawed at him. He wanted to press, to ask names, to dig into histories he had buried. But something in Emma's face, the sudden shadow that crossed it, made him swallow the questions. He shook his head. "No reason." She gave a faint smile and went back to unpacking, but unease coiled inside him. The evening crept in. Outside, Chicago's streets pulsed with car horns and footsteps, but inside the apartment, the silence grew heavier. Daniel tried to distract himself with music, turning on the stereo, but every song seemed to echo wrong. Emma lit a candle, the scent of lavender filling the room, yet it couldn't chase away the tension tightening around them. At one point, Daniel stood in front of the bookshelf, staring at the photograph as though it might confess something if he looked long enough. Emma walked in carrying folded towels. "Daniel," she said softly, almost pleading, "it's just a picture. Don't make it something it's not." His jaw tightened. "I'm not. I just thought I recognized her." Emma's smile faltered. "You don't. Trust me." For a long moment their eyes held, his full of doubt, hers laced with unease. Then she turned away, setting the towels down, her hands trembling just enough for him to notice. Night fell hard. Rain tapped against the window, and the glow of the streetlights blurred on the wet glass. Emma curled against Daniel on the couch, pretending everything was fine. He wrapped his arm around her, but his grip was stiff, distracted. The television played a sitcom laugh track, hollow and out of place in the thick air. Emma tilted her head up at him. "You're quiet." "Just tired," he replied, though exhaustion wasn't what burned in his chest. When she drifted off to sleep beside him, Daniel slipped free and stood again before the photo. He stared at his own reflection in the glass, overlapping with the woman's face. Familiarity twisted into unease, unease into dread. His phone buzzed again. He glanced down at the screen. Mom, for the 6th time that day. He didn't answer. Instead, he silenced it and slipped it back into his pocket, the screen flashing briefly in the dark. The storm outside deepened, thunder rolling in the distance. Daniel returned to the couch, Emma breathing softly in her sleep. He studied her, face delicate in the glow of the television. She looked peaceful, innocent, but the shadow of that photograph loomed in his mind, whispering questions he couldn't ignore. By the time midnight passed, Daniel knew the silence between them wasn't temporary. It was the start of something far heavier. He closed his eyes, pretending to rest, but his mind spun restlessly until the phone buzzed again. This time, the vibration felt urgent, almost desperate. His hand hovered over it, torn between ignoring and answering, and then, with a sharp inhale, he picked it up. The screen glowed in the dark, casting a faint light across Daniel's tired face. Emma stirred beside him, murmuring softly in her sleep, but did not wake. With a deep breath, he swiped to answer. "Mom." His voice was hushed, guarded. On the other end, a sharp inhale. Then her voice, trembling, frantic. "Daniel! Thank God! Why didn't you answer? I've been calling all day." He sat up, moving quietly from the couch to the kitchen, glancing back to be sure Emma was still asleep. His chest tightened at the tone in his mother's voice. It wasn't irritation, it was fear. "What's going on? Why are you calling so much?" For a moment, all he heard was her shaky breathing. Then she whispered, "She's there, isn't she? Emma, she's with you now." Daniel froze, the words hanging heavy in the air. His grip on the phone tightened. "Yeah, she moved in today. What's the problem?" "Daniel," his mother's voice cracked. "You can't let her stay. Please, you have to end this before it's too late." His stomach dropped. He looked toward the living room where Emma slept, her face soft and trusting under the flicker of the TV light. "Mom, what the hell are you talking about? You don't even know her!" "I know enough," she snapped, then immediately broke down again, her voice collapsing into sobs. "Oh God, you don't understand. I begged your father to tell you the truth, but he never did. He never told either of you." Daniel pressed a hand to his forehead, the words slicing through him like ice. "The truth about what? What are you saying?" Her breath hitched on the other end, muffled like she was covering the phone. Then came a whisper so faint he almost didn't catch it. "She's not just some girl, Daniel. She's blood." The floor seemed to tilt beneath him. He gripped the edge of the counter, his pulse roaring in his ears. "What do you mean she's blood? Mom, that doesn't make sense. Stop being cryptic and just say it." There was silence. Long, agonizing silence, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. Then, through her tears, she spoke again. "She's his daughter. From before us. From that affair. She's your father's child, which makes her—" Daniel staggered back, the phone slippery in his hand. His throat felt dry, his voice raw. "My stepsister?" His mother sobbed harder now, gasping between words. "I tried to keep this from you. I thought distance would protect you both. But I never imagined— Daniel, you can't stay with her. You can't—" The line suddenly filled with noise, her crying, the rustle of movement, the distant slam of a door. She was unraveling, her fear spilling through every syllable. "Mom, stop!" Daniel's voice cracked, desperate. "You can't just drop something like this and hang up. I need proof. I need answers. How do you know? How long have you known?" But instead of answers, there was only her broken voice. "I warned him. I warned your father years ago this would happen. And now it has." The phone went quiet for a beat. Then she whispered, "I can't talk anymore. Please, Daniel, end it before you destroy each other." And with that, the line went dead. Daniel lowered the phone slowly, his reflection staring back at him in the dark window above the sink. His face was pale, his eyes wide, his chest rising and falling like he'd run a marathon. The apartment was silent except for Emma's soft breathing in the next room. She shifted slightly, her hair spilling across the pillow. Innocent. Unaware. His hands shook as he placed the phone on the counter. Every nerve in his body screamed that it couldn't be true, that it was some mistake, some lie born of old grudges. But the certainty in his mother's voice lingered, chilling him to the bone. He leaned against the counter, struggling to piece it together. The photo. The familiarity in her mother's face. His mother's panic. Each thread tangled into a web. He couldn't escape. For a moment he considered waking Emma right then, demanding answers. But the thought of seeing her eyes, full of confusion and maybe even guilt, stopped him cold. He wasn't ready. Not yet. Instead, he paced the kitchen, the floor creaking beneath his steps. He replayed every memory of Emma, their first date, her laugh, the way she kissed him goodnight, each moment now tainted by a shadow that made his stomach twist. Outside, the storm raged harder, rain pelting the windows, thunder rattling the glass. Inside, the silence grew unbearable, thick with secrets. Daniel pressed his palms to his eyes, whispering to himself, "It can't be true. It can't." But the echo of his mother's sobs said otherwise, and as the storm clawed at the city, Daniel knew the night had changed everything. There would be no going back. The only way forward was through the truth, no matter how much it destroyed. Daniel barely slept. Every time his eyes closed, his mother's broken voice replayed in his head, echoing like a curse. She's his daughter. She's blood. By dawn, his nerves were frayed. He lay in bed beside Emma, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of her breathing. She looked peaceful. Her body curled toward him, trusting. But he couldn't bring himself to touch her. The warmth he once felt now carried a sickening weight. As the sun climbed higher, Emma stirred, yawning softly before sliding out of bed. She kissed his cheek on her way to the kitchen, unaware of the storm raging inside him. "Coffee?" she asked lightly. "Yeah," Daniel muttered, his throat tight. He waited until she disappeared down the hall before sitting up, heart pounding. His eyes drifted to the boxes stacked neatly against the wall, the ones she hadn't unpacked yet. A knot twisted in his gut. He hated himself for even thinking it, but the need for truth was stronger than his guilt. Slowly, he rose and crossed the room. He crouched in front of a box labeled clothes, then pushed it aside. Another, smaller box caught his attention. Personal. His chest tightened. Daniel glanced toward the kitchen. The sound of running water and clinking mugs covered his movements. He pulled the box closer, his hands trembling as he pried it open. Inside lay an assortment of papers, neatly tucked into a worn leather folder. His stomach flipped as he opened it. Passports, birth certificates, old letters. His eyes scanned quickly until one document froze him in place. Emma's birth certificate. Her last name printed in bold letters across the top, Harrington. The same as his father's. Daniel's vision blurred. His pulse hammered so hard he thought his chest might split open. It can't be. There has to be another explanation. But memory clawed its way back. Years ago, standing small and confused in a courthouse hallway while adults screamed about custody, betrayal, affairs. He remembered his father's voice, low and tense, saying, "A name. Harrington." The same name now staring back at him from Emma's papers. His hands shook violently as he shoved the documents back, slamming the folder shut. "Daniel?" He jolted, spinning around. Emma stood in the doorway holding 2 mugs of coffee, her eyebrows raised in confusion. He forced a smile, though his face felt rigid. "Hey, I was just looking for my charger. Thought maybe it got mixed up with your stuff." Emma tilted her head, her eyes lingering on the box. For a moment, suspicion flickered across her face, but then she smiled faintly and walked over, setting a mug on the table. "You're always losing that charger," she teased. Daniel's laugh came out hollow. "Yeah, always." Emma leaned down and kissed his cheek again, her warmth sending a pang of guilt through him. She moved back toward the kitchen, humming softly to herself, as if nothing was wrong. But inside Daniel, the doubt grew like a fire. He sat heavily on the couch, staring into his coffee, the steam curling upward like smoke from something burning. His mind ran wild, images of his father's betrayal, his mother's heartbreak, and Emma's innocent smile all colliding into something unbearable. The walls of the apartment seemed to close in, the silence broken only by the faint city sounds outside. He clenched his fists, trying to steady his breathing. When Emma returned, she curled up beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. "You're quiet again," she said softly. Daniel swallowed hard. "Just tired." But his tone betrayed him. Emma's eyes lingered on his face, searching. For a second, she looked as though she might ask more, but instead she sighed and let it go. They sat like that for a while, the weight between them growing heavier with every passing minute. Daniel barely heard the television, barely tasted the coffee. His thoughts were consumed by one relentless question. Was she really his sister? Later that night, when Emma drifted off to sleep beside him again, Daniel lay awake staring at the ceiling. The shadows in the room seemed darker, the air thicker. He thought about confronting her, demanding the truth, but fear stopped him. Fear of what she might say. Fear that his mother's words were right. He turned his head to look at her. Emma's face was calm, lips slightly parted, her breath even. To anyone else, she looked like peace. To him, she was a mystery that threatened to destroy everything. The memory of the custody battle replayed sharper now. The gavel's slam, his mother's trembling hands gripping his father's absence in the courtroom. Back then, Daniel didn't understand. Now, the pieces began to fit together, jagged and cruel. He closed his eyes, pressing his palms into them until spots of light danced against the darkness. He whispered to himself, barely audible, "It's true. God, it's true." Beside him, Emma shifted, murmuring in her sleep, her hand brushing against his. The touch made his chest ache. Daniel rolled away, staring into the shadows, wide-eyed. By the time the clock struck 2 a.m., his mind was made up. He couldn't live in silence, couldn't carry this weight alone. The truth had to come out, whether Emma admitted it or not. Tomorrow he would confront her. The house was too still, too quiet. Daniel sat on the couch in the dim glow of the hallway lamp, his hands clasped tightly together, thumbs pressing against one another until his knuckles whitened. He had tried to sleep, but the documents he had found in Emma's bag would not let his mind rest. Her name, Emma Wycliffe. That surname had carved open a wound buried deep in his memory, a name once spoken in a courtroom filled with shouting, accusations, and the final judgment that had torn his family apart. By the time the clock struck 2 in the morning, Daniel could no longer contain the storm boiling inside him. He heard Emma's soft breathing through the closed bedroom door, and with each rise and fall, his anger swelled. His mother's phone call still echoed in his ears. "Don't let her stay. She's not safe." He pushed himself up, the floorboards creaking under his weight, and marched toward the bedroom. His hand hovered over the doorknob for a long, trembling second before twisting it open. Emma stirred, blinking awake as the dim hallway light spilled across the room. Her voice was groggy, confused. "Daniel? What's going on?" "You tell." "Me!" Daniel shot back, his tone sharper than he intended. "What's your last name?" Emma sat up slowly, pulling the blanket around her shoulders as though to shield herself. "What? Why are you asking me that in the middle of the night?" "Just answer me." His voice cracked, anger and fear blending into something unstable. "Your name. All of it." Her lips parted, hesitation flashing in her eyes. Then softly, "Emma Wycliffe." The name sent a jolt through him. Hearing it from her own mouth was like striking flint against steel, igniting everything inside him. He took a step closer, fists clenched. "You didn't think to tell me that earlier? To mention that your last name is the same as his?" Emma frowned, genuine confusion painting her features. "His? Who are you talking about?" "My father." Daniel's shout reverberated against the walls, rattling the picture frames. "The man who left us, who dragged Mom into court and tried to take me away from her. The name I've tried to forget for half my life. And you just happen to have it too. What the hell are you hiding, Emma?" Her eyes widened, her breath hitching. For a moment, Daniel thought he saw something flicker there. Recognition, maybe even guilt. But it vanished as quickly as it came. She shook her head furiously. "Daniel, I swear, I don't know anything about your father. I didn't even know your last name until you told me. Wycliffe is just my name. It doesn't mean—" "Don't lie to me." His voice cracked under the weight of desperation. He felt like a child again, standing in that courtroom as lawyers hurled accusations. Back and forth, his parents' faces twisted in grief and rage. "You think I don't see it? My mother warned me about you. She told me not to let you stay. So tell me, Emma, why is she so terrified of you?" Emma flinched, her hands trembling as she clutched the blanket tighter. I don't know." I don't know why she would say that. Her voice was thin, stretched like paper ready to tear. "Daniel, please, you have to believe me. I don't know what's happening, but I'm not your enemy." But her trembling betrayed her words. Daniel's paranoia latched onto it, twisting it into evidence of deception. "You're scared because you've been caught. You've been hiding something since the moment you showed up here. Why? What are you after?" Tears brimmed in Emma's eyes, and her voice rose in a mixture of fear and frustration. "Stop twisting everything. I'm not hiding anything. Why are you attacking me instead of asking what's really going on?" The room felt smaller with every second, the air, too, heavy to breathe. Daniel's chest heaved as anger fought with doubt, the lines between truth and lies blurring. He wanted to believe her, wanted to trust the girl who had slipped so easily into his life. But the shadows of the past screamed louder. Emma slid off the bed, her movements jerky, defensive. "If you can't trust me, then what's the point of me staying here?" Her voice cracked as she moved toward the door. "I thought you were different, Daniel. I thought you'd understand." "Understand what?" he snapped, blocking her path. "That you just happened to wander into my life with the same cursed last name as the man who destroyed it? That my mother is begging me to throw you out and you still won't explain why?" Her hands shook as she shoved past him. "I can't explain something I don't know. And if you're so convinced I'm some kind of threat, then fine. Maybe I shouldn't be here." Before Daniel could stop her, Emma yanked open the front door. The night swallowed her figure as she stormed out, her footsteps fading into the darkness. The slam of the door echoed through the silent house, leaving Daniel standing in the hallway, his chest heaving, his mind a whirlwind of rage and regret. The quiet returned, but it was no longer the kind of quiet that offered peace. It was suffocating, filled with shadows that whispered doubts he couldn't silence. Daniel pressed his hands against his temples, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. Emma was gone. His mother's warning lingered like a curse, and he was left alone with the gnawing fear that none of this was coincidence. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, rattling them like skeletal fingers tapping at the glass. Somewhere in that darkness, Emma was wandering, carrying secrets she refused to share, or perhaps didn't even know herself. Daniel sank onto the couch, staring at the door she had left through. His mind replayed every word, every tremble, in her voice, every shadow in her expression. He didn't know if he had just pushed away the only person who could help him uncover the truth, or if he had narrowly escaped something far worse. Either way, the night was far from over. The headlights carved a pale tunnel through the empty road as Daniel's car sped into the night. His knuckles clutched the steering wheel so tightly that the skin around them whitened. Emma's voice still echoed in his head, broken, trembling, yet stubbornly denying everything. The image of her storming out, swallowed by the dark street, gnawed at him like a blade twisting deeper with each replay. He didn't know where she had gone. He didn't even care in that moment. What consumed him instead was the unanswered question that had haunted him since the discovery of her last name. Why did it match his father's? The more he tried to shove the thought away, the stronger it returned, coiling around his chest like a serpent. By the time he reached the outskirts of town, only one place seemed to matter: his mother's house. If anyone still held the missing pieces of this puzzle, it was her. She had guarded the past with a firmness that once felt protective. Tonight, it felt like a prison. The small cottage appeared at the end of the gravel drive, wrapped in silence and shadow. Daniel killed the engine, stepped out, and stood still for a moment, staring at the faint light flickering through the living room curtains. A part of him almost turned back, fearing what truths might lurk inside, but his legs moved forward anyway, carrying him to the door. His knock was not gentle. Within moments, his mother appeared, wrapped in a pale robe, her hair tangled from sleep. Surprise gave way to concern as she looked into his face. "Daniel? It's the middle of the night. What happened?" "I need answers," he said, his voice low, urgent, trembling at the edges. "About Dad, about Emma, about everything you've never told me." Her hand froze on the doorknob. For a moment, she seemed to consider shutting the door, as if silence might protect them both. But the plea in Daniel's eyes, raw and desperate, broke through her defenses. She stepped aside and let him in. The house smelled faintly of chamomile, tea and dust. Familiar, safe, yet tonight it felt suffocating. They sat across from each other at the worn wooden table. Daniel didn't waste time. "I found documents," he said. "Emma's last name. It's the same as his. Don't lie to me anymore, Mom. Who is she? Why does her name tie her to him?" His mother's shoulders sagged, her hands twisting in her lap. She exhaled slowly, as though dragging decades of secrets to the surface. "Your father," she began, her voice faltering. "He wasn't the man you wanted him to be. I tried to protect you from that. There was an affair." The words struck Daniel like a slap. He blinked hard, his throat constricting. "An affair? With who?" "I don't know her name," she whispered. "I never wanted to. All I knew was that he'd betrayed us. And that betrayal nearly destroyed me." Daniel's pulse roared in his ears. The room tilted, blurred. "And Emma?" he demanded. Her silence was answer enough. Tears welled in her eyes as she finally nodded. "It's possible. She might be his daughter." The chair screeched against the floor as Daniel shot to his feet. His heart pounded so violently he thought it might shatter his ribs. "You're telling me Emma could be my half-sister? And you never thought I deserved to know?" "I didn't know for certain," she cried, rising too, her hands trembling as they reached for him. "I thought the past was buried. I prayed it would never matter." I wanted you to have a chance at peace without his shadow poisoning everything. Daniel pulled away, pacing across the room. His chest heaved with a mixture of rage, grief, and disbelief. Fragments of memories slammed into him. The custody battle, his father's smirk across the courtroom, his mother's tear-streaked face. Every unanswered question, every scar he had carried, suddenly sharpened into a new, horrific possibility. All these years, Daniel muttered, his voice hoarse. All these years you let me believe I could build something real. And now the one person I let in, Emma, might be tied to the man who ruined everything. Daniel, please, his mother begged, her eyes glistening. Don't punish her for his sins. If she is his child, then she's as much a victim as you are. But her words only fueled the fire raging inside him. Victim or not, Emma's trembling voice during their fight replayed in his head. Was it fear of losing him, or fear of being discovered? His fists clenched. His breath came in jagged bursts. You don't understand, he said, his tone sharp, dangerous. If this is true, it means every moment with her was built on a lie. And if she knew even a little, then she's been playing me this whole time. His mother's lips parted, ready to protest, but Daniel didn't wait. He grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair and strode to the door. Daniel, where are you going? She called after him. He paused only once, his hand on the knob, his shadow stretching across the faded carpet. His voice was steady, but beneath it was a current of something darker. I need to hear it from her. And if she's been lying to me, I don't know what I'll do. The door shut behind him with a hollow thud. Outside, the night air was sharp, laced with frost. Daniel's car waited like a beast crouched in the dark. He climbed in, the engine growling to life, headlights blazing once more. His mind was no longer fogged by doubt. It was sharpened by fury. As the wheels crunched over gravel, his thoughts spun with dangerous clarity. Emma had stormed into the night hours earlier. If she hadn't returned home, there were only a few places she could have gone. He would find her. He would make her speak. And when he looked into her eyes, he would know the truth. The silence in Daniel's apartment felt heavier than the air itself, as if the walls carried the weight of every secret that had been spoken, every accusation thrown like daggers in the night. He hadn't slept. His mind had cycled endlessly. Through the revelation his mother had unleashed, the possibility that Emma was his half-sister, that everything between them had been a cruel accident of fate, or worse, a deception carefully concealed. When the knock came on the door just after dawn, Daniel flinched as though struck. He already knew who it was. Somehow he had been waiting for her return, as though her absence had been a storm that inevitably had to circle back. He hesitated, his fingers frozen on the door handle. Then he opened it. Emma stood there, her eyes red-rimmed, her hair unkempt from the night wind. She looked smaller, as though the darkness of the world had pressed her down. She tried to smile, but her lips trembled. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice nearly breaking. Daniel's jaw clenched. He said nothing, stepping aside so she could enter. She moved hesitantly, as if crossing a battlefield. For a long moment, neither spoke. Emma sank onto the couch, her hands twisting in her lap. Daniel remained standing, his arms folded, his eyes fixed on her like a judge waiting for the condemned to speak. Finally, she broke the silence. "I need to tell you the truth. At least, the truth I know." Daniel's chest tightened. "Then, speak," Emma swallowed hard. "I didn't know, not for certain, but I had suspicions. Things didn't add up. The way your mother used to look at me when we visited, the way my father would change the subject whenever your family's name came up. I thought it was paranoia at first, but deep down, I feared there was something more." Daniel's fists tightened, his pulse pounded in his ears. "And you never told me?" Tears welled in Emma's eyes. "Because I didn't want it to be true. I wanted us, Daniel. I wanted love more than answers. If I had dug deeper, I might have destroyed everything before it even began. So I stayed quiet. I let myself believe in us instead of the shadows. Her words struck him like a blade with no clear edge, cutting, but not clean. Daniel sank into the chair across from her, his body trembling with rage and confusion. So all this time you carried that suspicion and you still let us, fall into this? Emma shook her head violently. No, it wasn't like that. I wasn't using you. I wasn't playing some sick game. I was terrified. But every time I looked at you, every time you held me, I thought, maybe love could rewrite the past. Maybe it could erase whatever sins our parents committed. Her voice cracked on the last word. She covered her face, sobbing quietly. Daniel felt his heart twist, torn between fury and compassion. Was she a victim, caught in the cruel entanglement of their families? Or was she a manipulator, hiding what she suspected until it was too late to undo the damage? He stood and paced the room, his mind unraveling. Do you even hear yourself? You gambled with the truth, with me, with us. And now look where we are, standing in the wreckage, unsure if everything between us was real. Emma rose slowly, her tears still streaking her face. It was real, Daniel. Whatever else you believe that. I loved you. I still love you. That's the only truth I can hold on to. Her words echoed in the silence, heavy, desperate. Daniel turned, his eyes searching hers, and for a fleeting moment he wanted to believe her. But the doubt gnawed at him like a parasite, whispering that love built on secrets could never stand. You say you loved me, Daniel muttered, his voice low. But love without truth is just another lie. Emma flinched as if he had struck her. She wiped her face with shaking hands. Then tell me what you want from me. Do you want me gone? Do you want me to disappear? Because if that's what you need to heal, I'll do it. But know this. I never wanted to hurt you. I only wanted to keep what little light we had alive. Daniel stared at her, his throat tightening. He didn't know what he wanted. Rage? Forgiveness? Distance? Or the impossible? To turn back time and live in the moments before secrets poisoned their love. The apartment filled with silence again, but this silence was different. Thicker, suffocating. Finally, Daniel whispered almost to himself, I don't even know who you are anymore. Emma's breath caught. Her eyes shimmered with something, between despair and defiance. She stepped closer, her voice trembling but steady. Then let me show you. Don't decide who I am based on what they did. Decide based on what I do now. Daniel looked at her, torn apart inside. He wanted to reject her, to cast her out forever. But some small, fragile part of him still longed for the warmth of her touch, the certainty of her embrace. Emma placed her hand gently on his arm, tentative as though he might recoil. He didn't move. Her touch was both comfort and poison, reminding him of what they had and what they might lose. I can't promise the past won't haunt us, she whispered. But I can promise I'm not your enemy. You have to believe. Me, Daniel. Daniel closed his eyes, fighting back a storm of emotions. When he opened them, he found her gaze fixed on him, pleading, desperate, unyielding. In that moment, Daniel realized the cruelest truth of all. Emma was neither purely victim nor manipulator. She was both, and that left him standing in a world where every answer raised more questions. He pulled away slowly, his face pale, his heart pounding. If we're going to survive this, Emma, we need more than promises. We need the truth, all of it. No more secrets. Emma nodded, her lips trembling. Then you'll have it. Tomorrow. I'll show you everything I know. But you have to be ready, Daniel. Because once the truth comes out, there's no going back. The words hung in the air like a warning, like a prophecy. Daniel turned away, staring out the window at the faint light of dawn. His chest felt hollow, his future uncertain. Tomorrow loomed like a storm waiting to break, and he wasn't sure whether it would destroy them or set them free. Daniel's head was a storm that refused to settle. Emma's confession from the night before gnawed at him, repeating in jagged loops. She had suspected the truth, but she'd stayed. She had wanted love more than clarity. Her words should have sounded like devotion, yet to him they reeked of manipulation, of complicity in a nightmare he hadn't chosen. When morning light pushed its way through the curtains, Daniel didn't feel renewed. Instead, he lay stiff in bed, his chest heavy, eyes unblinking. Emma was in the kitchen, humming softly, the sound almost mocking in its innocence. Every note grated against him. He wondered if that softness was another mask, another performance, crafted to keep him tethered. By the time he dragged himself from the sheets, a strange compulsion had taken hold of him. He couldn't let her out of his sight. He needed to know what she did when she wasn't looking at him. He needed to see if her hands trembled, if her eyes darted away when she thought herself unseen. The thought became a command, ironclad and absolute. He followed her into the living room, lingering at the doorway as she curled into the couch with a notebook. She pretended to sketch, her pencil grazing the page in vague, hesitant strokes. But Daniel saw something else. The way she hunched her shoulders, the way she angled the notebook slightly away from him. She was hiding. Of that, he was certain. His pulse throbbed in his temples. He stepped closer, deliberately quiet, his bare feet pressing against the floorboards, with silent precision. Over her shoulder he glimpsed not sketches but words, scattered lines of sentences, his name, his family. The words truth and forgive and blood clawed at him from the page. Emma snapped the notebook shut as if burned, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just thoughts," she said softly, as though her gentleness could dissolve suspicion. Daniel returned her smile, but his jaw tightened. He said nothing, only turned away, letting the silence stretch between them like a wire pulled taut. From that moment, watching became his ritual. He memorized the rhythm of her footsteps, the pattern of her breathing, the cadence of her words when she rehearsed excuses. He tracked her when she left the apartment, feigning errands. Standing at the window, he followed the bob of her dark hair until it vanished into the blur of the city. Each departure burned through him like betrayal, each return like the reopening of a wound. Night offered no reprieve. He lay awake, listening to her movements in the bathroom, the whisper of water against porcelain, the click of the lock sliding into place. His imagination filled the gaps, hidden phone calls, whispered conversations with ghosts from the past, evidence flushed away before he could see it. Jealousy and revulsion tangled together until they were indistinguishable. He hated her and craved her all at once. He longed to demand the truth, yet feared it would annihilate him completely. He needed her close, yet every breath she took in his presence stoked the fire in his veins. One evening, he caught her at the hallway mirror, staring not at her reflection but through it, her face pale, her lips trembling as though she were about to confess again. But to whom? To herself? To the image staring back? When she noticed him watching, she laughed too quickly, a brittle sound that cut through the air. "You scare me sometimes, Daniel," she whispered. The words should have pierced him with guilt, but instead, they anchored his obsession deeper. If she was afraid, then she had something to fear being discovered. And if she had something to hide, then he was justified. The apartment became a cage, its walls pulsing with tension. Daniel's thoughts fractured, replaying fragments of her confession, his mother's revelation, his father's betrayal. The pieces no longer fit together, yet he pressed them into shapes that made sense only to him. Emma was the missing link. the bridge between two families steeped in secrecy. If she admitted her suspicions, then she had always known more than she confessed. And if she had known, then every smile, every touch, every whispered promise of love had been poisoned. His breathing grew ragged when he lingered too long on those thoughts. Sometimes he would press his palm against the wall to steady himself, his body trembling with the force of emotions he couldn't contain. His reflection in the mirror looked alien, eyes bloodshot, skin pale, mouth twisted in lines of suspicion and fury. Yet Emma, fragile as glass, continued to move around him, with practiced calm. She poured tea, she folded blankets, she hummed songs that once soothed him, but now curdled his insides. Every act of care felt rehearsed, every gesture designed to pacify him, to dull the edge of his obsession. The more she tried to appear ordinary, the deeper he sank into madness. One night, when the city outside was muted and the apartment cloaked, in darkness Daniel crept from the bed. Emma's soft breathing drifted from the couch where she had chosen to sleep, claiming she needed space. He moved to her side, staring down at her face illuminated faintly by the glow of the streetlight. Through the blinds, her features were peaceful, unguarded. But to Daniel, that serenity was another mask. He leaned closer, his chest heaving, listening for lies hidden in her breath. His hand hovered over her notebook resting on the table, temptation clawing at him. With shaking fingers, he opened it. Pages fluttered like wings in the silence. Words leapt at him, fragments, confessions, scribbles of doubt and fear. His name appeared again and again, surrounded by phrases like love against reason and truth buried. Daniel's vision blurred. He couldn't tell if the words were condemnation or devotion, if they proved her guilt or her torment. But the ambiguity was worse than certainty. It was the knife twisting slowly inside him. Emma stirred, her eyes fluttering open. For a brief second, her gaze locked with his, raw and vulnerable. No lies, no masks, just terror. The notebook slipped from his hands, pages spilling across the floor like a confession exposed. Daniel staggered back, his breath harsh, his chest caving under the weight of what he'd seen, of what he could no longer deny. The walls of the apartment pressed in tighter, suffocating, and in that crushing silence he realized something terrifying. He wasn't sure if he wanted the truth anymore. He only wanted release, from her, from himself, from everything. The night swallowed them both, heavy with dread, as the line between love and destruction thinned to a fragile thread that promised to snap. Rain lashed against the windows of the Chicago apartment, sheets of water blurring the neon lights outside. Daniel stood in the living room, pacing with the restless energy of a man who had lost his grip on reason. His breaths came sharp, almost ragged, like each inhale scraped his throat raw. Emma sat curled on the couch, knees drawn to her chest, eyes fixed on him with a mixture of fear and pity. The silence between them was alive, trembling, dangerous. Daniel's hands shook as he ran them through his hair, his gaze darting from her to the door, then back again. "You've been lying to me," he muttered, his voice low and uneven. "Since the beginning. I know it now." Emma's lips trembled, but she didn't immediately respond. She seemed to weigh each word, as though she understood that any misstep might ignite an explosion. "Daniel, I never lied about loving you," she said softly, her voice fragile against the storm outside. "But I was afraid of your family, afraid of what I might find out if I pushed too hard. I thought if I held on to you, maybe I could ignore the rest." Daniel stopped pacing, his chest rising and falling like a trapped animal's. Her calmness only enraged him further. "Afraid?" His tone cracked. "You weren't afraid. You were calculating. You knew something was wrong and you stayed because it benefited you. You stayed because you wanted to see how far you could push me." Emma flinched but didn't rise. The dim light painted her face in shadows, making her look older, wearier. "You're twisting everything. That's not what happened. I wanted us to work, Daniel. I still do." The words struck him like glass shattering. His laughter was hollow, bitter. "Work? Look at us. Look at what you've done to me." He slammed his fist into the wall, the sharp crack reverberating through the apartment. Plaster dust rained onto the carpet. Emma gasped, instinctively recoiling. For the first time, fear overtook pity in her expression. She rose slowly, keeping her eyes locked on him as though facing down a wild animal. "Daniel, stop. You're scaring me." Her words only poured gasoline on the fire raging inside him. "Scaring you?" he barked, pointing at her. "You've been tearing me apart from the inside, watching me unravel like it's some kind of game." His voice broke into a raw scream, one that clawed at the air, carrying beyond the walls of their apartment. Somewhere down the hall, a door creaked open, then shut again. Neighbors stirred, whispers traveling through the thin walls. Still, no one came to intervene. The building had learned long ago that some storms were better left unentered. Emma's tears welled, glistening under the flickering lamp. She edged toward the door, every step cautious, deliberate. "Please, Daniel, let's not do this. We need space, both of us. I'll leave tonight, and tomorrow we can—" "Leave?" His eyes widened, wild with disbelief. "No, you don't get to walk away from me. Not after everything. You don't just vanish into the night like none of this mattered." His voice cracked again, louder this time, so loud it rattled the frames on the wall. He grabbed the edge of the coffee table and hurled it aside, the crash echoing like thunder. Emma screamed, stumbling backward toward the door, her hand fumbling desperately for the knob. The neighbors were fully awake now. Behind closed doors, they listened to the chaos, their hearts hammering but their bodies frozen with the familiar paralysis of urban indifference. Screams in Chicago were not uncommon, and involvement often came at too high a price. "Daniel, please!" Emma's voice cut through the storm of noise, trembling with desperation. "I love you, but I can't do this anymore. You're breaking me." Her words struck him with devastating force. For a fleeting second he faltered, his rage dimming into confusion. His chest heaved, his hands trembled at his sides. She reached for the knob and twisted, pulling the door open to the rain-soaked night. That moment of hesitation was all she needed. Emma bolted, her bare feet slapping against the cold hallway tiles. Daniel roared her name, the sound primal and broken, then lunged after her. The neighbors cracked their doors, faces pale in the dim glow of the emergency exit lights. They saw Emma rush past, hair wild, tears streaking her cheeks, her nightgown clinging damply as she stumbled toward the stairwell. They saw Daniel only a heartbeat later, his face twisted with fury and anguish, his frame filling the narrow hall as he thundered after her. No one reached out, no one stopped him. Doors closed again, locks clicked, whispers died. The building returned to silence except for the echo of footsteps and screams fading into the stairwell. Emma burst into the street, rain pelting her skin, soaking her hair until it plastered against her face. The city seemed alive around her, horns blaring, tires hissing on slick asphalt, neon signs bleeding into puddles. Her breath came in panicked gasps, each one swallowed by the storm. She ran blindly, her only thought escape. Behind her, Daniel tore out of the building, ignoring the rain that drenched him instantly. His fury was no longer contained by walls. The storm outside mirrored the storm within, relentless and merciless. His eyes locked onto her figure darting through the night, and without thought, without hesitation, he pursued. Pedestrians glanced their way, a few pausing under umbrellas, but like the neighbors upstairs, none dared to intervene. In the city's undercurrent, people recognized danger and knew better than to step too close. Emma's lungs burned, her legs heavy with exhaustion, but she pushed forward, weaving through puddles, nearly slipping on the slick pavement. The rain blurred everything, turning lights into streaks, faces into shadows. She heard Daniel's footsteps behind her, closer, louder, unstoppable. Her mind screamed for safety, for someone, anyone to help. But all she had was the storm and the endless streets. Daniel shouted her name again, his voice a mix of desperation and wrath. It carried over the thunder, over the traffic, over the pounding of her heart. She turned a corner, her breath hitching, and for a moment, she thought she had lost him. But when she glanced back, his figure loomed through the curtain of rain, unstoppable, unrelenting. And so the chase bled into the night. Two souls bound by love, lies, and destruction, hurtling toward an inevitable reckoning that neither could escape. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening like shards of glass. The city smelled of wet asphalt and smoke from distant cars. Emma crouched against a fire hydrant, shivering, her clothes soaked and plastered to her body. Her mind was a tangle of terror and exhaustion, replaying Daniel's shouting, the blur of the chase, the madness that had consumed him. Sirens pierced the night as police cars skidded to a stop nearby, their lights painting the wet streets in red and blue. Streaks. Officers leapt out, their boots splashing through puddles. Emma froze, unable to move, her hands trembling as a uniformed officer approached. "Miss, are you okay?" the officer asked, his voice steady but wary. Emma tried to speak, but only a rasping sound emerged. Her knees buckled, and she slumped to the ground. Two officers knelt beside her, wrapping her in a dry jacket and guiding her to the patrol car. She kept glancing behind her, heart hammering in her chest, afraid of what she might see. Then she saw him. Daniel was sprawled in the middle of the street, rainwater mixing with the dark crimson that seeped from a wound on his side. His breaths were shallow, ragged, and intermittent, his body twitching as if the cold and pain were tearing him apart from within. Blood pooled beneath him, glinting like polished metal in the police lights. "Officer, help him!" Emma screamed, her voice cracking, hysteria rising. She ran toward him, slipping in the slick puddles, catching herself just short of falling completely. The officers moved quickly, one kneeling beside Daniel while another guided Emma to safety. They worked with practiced urgency, applying pressure to his wound, calling for an ambulance, stabilizing him as best they could on the wet street. Emma's hands shook uncontrollably, brushing against his soaked hair, feeling the warmth of blood mingled with the chill of rain. Through the chaos, her mind spiraled back to everything, the confessions, the suspicions, the whispers from Daniel's mother, the documents she had found, and the confrontation that had erupted into madness. The truth she had feared most now loomed in front of her like a living shadow, impossible to ignore. When paramedics arrived, they quickly assessed Daniel, carefully lifting him onto a stretcher. Emma followed in a daze, her gaze never leaving his pale, trembling face. In the ambulance, the sirens wailed again, louder this time, a brutal soundtrack to a story built on deceit, love, and betrayal. At the hospital, doctors rushed him into surgery while Emma waited in the cold, antiseptic-scented corridor. She felt hollow, her body shivering uncontrollably. She hadn't realized how much fear had been feeding her adrenaline until it collapsed, leaving her numb. Then, the detective arrived. A tall man with a tired face and eyes that had seen too many ruined lives, he approached Emma with a gentle but firm tone. "Miss, we need you to answer some questions. It's important for the investigation." Emma nodded, barely able to lift her head. I'll try," she whispered. The questioning was slow, deliberate. She recounted the events, the move-in, the photograph, Daniel's mother's phone calls, her own suspicions, and the confrontation that had spiraled out of control. Her voice quivered as she spoke, every detail peeling back layers of deception. Finally, she reached the part everyone had been avoiding, the truth about their families. "Daniel and I," she said, her voice catching, we share the same father." The detective's expression didn't change, but his pen paused above the notebook, the gravity of her words hanging in the sterile air. "Your father?" She nodded, tears streaming freely. "Yes. I didn't know when we started. I thought we could find love despite the past, but it was already written in the blood. We were never supposed to be together like this." The weight of her words settled over the room, heavy and unyielding. Daniel's father, the estranged man who had sown betrayal and secrecy, had unknowingly, or perhaps recklessly, entangled his children in a web that neither of them could escape. When Daniel emerged from surgery hours later, pale and bandaged, his eyes immediately sought hers. The machines beeped around him, steady but insistent, like a metronome marking a life suspended between survival and devastation. He didn't speak at first. His hand lifted slowly, trembling, and she took it in hers. Neither needed words. The truth had already fallen between them, as irreversible as spilled blood. They sat in silence, connected by grief, confusion, and a love that could no longer exist in any form that made sense. The families, once protective and secretive, were exposed. Phone calls had been made, lawyers notified, whispers had become shouts. Daniel's mother wept quietly in the hospital waiting room, finally confronting decades of deception. Emma's father, distant and bitter, faced the consequences of choices that had torn apart 2 lives and nearly destroyed 2 souls. Neither Daniel nor Emma could escape the damage, the sense of betrayal that cut through them like a scalpel. Their love, which had once been tender and all-consuming, had transformed into a shared wound. They were bound now, not by desire, but by the cruel clarity of truth. Days later, Daniel was discharged with strict orders for rest, his body scarred and fragile. Emma, too, was shaken, her own trauma etched into her expression. When they looked at each other, it was with a mixture of sorrow and resignation, the memory of what they had been tangled irrevocably with the knowledge of what they could never be. They were siblings, bound by blood and history, victims of deception, manipulation, and the secrets of those who had gone before them. Love had become impossible. Desire had become contamination. And trust was shattered beyond repair. In the end, the city around them continued its relentless pulse, streets shining with rain, sirens echoing faintly in the distance, lives moving forward. But for Daniel and Emma, the world had ended in the small, sterile room of the hospital. They had survived the night, survived the truth, but in doing so, they had lost each other forever. And in that loss, the bitter lesson remained. Some truths, no matter how long buried, demand their reckoning, and the cost of uncovering them can destroy everything we hold dear. The courthouse loomed over the city like a silent sentinel, gray stone and iron gates casting long shadows that seemed to echo the weight of past sins. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation, murmurs, and the faint scent of polished wood. Daniel and Emma arrived separately, each escorted by their respective attorneys. The tension between them was palpable, though neither spoke, their eyes avoiding contact across the crowded room. From the moment proceedings began, it was clear this would not be a typical case. The judge, stern and composed, called the courtroom to order, and the first witnesses took the stand. Daniel's mother recounted her long-hidden suspicions, the fear that had kept her from telling him sooner. Her voice trembled occasionally, betraying a mixture of guilt and grief, and Daniel's jaw clenched with every word. Next came Emma's father, whose testimony was sharp and defensive. He painted a picture of secrecy and shame, of a life dictated by poor choices and reckless decisions. He admitted knowing of the familial connection, but claimed ignorance of the potential consequences until it was far too late. The words cut, like knives. Emma's eyes flicked to Daniel briefly, seeing the storm of emotions, anger, despair, confusion, reflected back at her. The courtroom seemed to close in around them as witnesses revealed fragments of their lives that had once been private, now twisted into evidence. Friends, neighbors, and distant relatives recounted moments that, in another context, might have seemed innocuous. Casual remarks, old photographs, whispered conversations. But under the weight of the trial, each detail became a thread in a tapestry of betrayal. Daniel's descent into obsession was highlighted next. Witnesses spoke of his sleepless nights, his stalking, the argument that had spilled into the rainy streets. Each account amplified the perception of a man unraveling, a lover consumed by jealousy, fear, and the need to uncover the truth. His. Attorneys tried to frame it as a response to shock and emotional turmoil, but the opposing counsel painted a darker picture, that of a man who could no longer distinguish love from control, compassion from possession. Emma's knowledge, or perceived knowledge, was dissected with surgical precision. Lawyers asked her to recount every suspicion she had harbored, every hesitation she had felt. She answered carefully, her voice steady despite the turmoil roiling beneath. She admitted fearing the truth, but insisted that her love had been genuine, that she had never intended harm. Yet each admission was twisted, reframed as deception, manipulation, or calculated inaction. As the trial progressed, the focus shifted to the families themselves. Lawyers unearthed decades of secrecy, infidelity, and half-truths, presenting a narrative where the sins of one generation haunted the next. Daniel and Emma were not merely participants in a personal tragedy, they were the culmination of choices made long before they had any say in their lives. The courtroom became a crucible where hidden misdeeds were laid bare, a stage on which every whispered secret was shouted into existence. The media coverage only intensified the pressure. Photographs of Daniel and Emma, pale and tense, circulated. On screens and in print, their private torment made public. Headlines hinted at scandal, forbidden love, betrayal, and moral collapse. They became symbols of something larger, pawns in a story where the human cost was often lost beneath sensationalism. By the final day, the weight of testimony had reached a fever pitch. The jury deliberated for hours, their faces unreadable as they considered the evidence. A love corrupted by coincidence, obsession fueled by fear, families fractured by deception. Lawyers whispered behind closed doors, notes exchanged, strategies adjusted, but nothing could erase the human toll displayed in front of them. When the verdict was finally read, the courtroom held its collective breath. The words felt like a hammer striking against every fragile piece of hope that had remained. Daniel and Emma were exonerated of criminal intent, but the moral judgment was unambiguous. The court acknowledged the accidental familial connection, recognized the emotional trauma inflicted on both parties, and underscored the profound consequences of secrecy and manipulation. The sentence, or lack thereof, felt like a paradoxical punishment. Both families were left exposed, their reputations fractured, the decisions of past generations echoing into the lives of the young adults caught in their legacy. Daniel and Emma, although legally free, were left with the scars of betrayal, the bitter knowledge that love had been rendered impossible, not by choice, but by blood. As the courtroom emptied, whispers followed them into the hallways. Some offered sympathy, others judgment. Daniel and Emma walked side by side, not touching, not speaking, their faces pale and hollow. Outside, the city pressed on, indifferent to the intimate catastrophe that had played out within its stone walls. For the First time since the revelation they saw each other fully, not as lovers, not as adversaries, but as survivors of a truth too heavy to bear. The verdict had closed one chapter of chaos but opened another, one filled with the slow, grinding work of emotional recovery, reconciliation with the past, and the impossible task of living with the knowledge that some bonds, no matter how deeply felt, could never be redeemed. As they left the courthouse, the sun broke through clouds for the first time in days. Its pale light washed over the city streets, glinting off wet pavement. But for Daniel and Emma, the light offered little comfort. The courtroom shadows would follow them forever, a reminder that the truth, once revealed, leaves no one untouched, and that some stories are not about justice but survival, survival in the aftermath of betrayal and discovery. 12 hours. That was all it took. 12 hours from the moment Emma had crossed the threshold of Daniel's apartment, her laughter filling the small space with warmth and promise, to the point where both their lives had shattered irreparably. Outside, Chicago thrummed with its usual rhythm: honking horns, distant sirens, neon lights flickering in puddles. But inside, the world they had known no longer existed. Daniel sat on the edge of the hospital bed, staring at the scarred bandages that wrapped his torso. His fingers traced the stiff material, as if touching the wounds could somehow allow him to understand what had gone wrong. Emma sat nearby, wrapped in a blanket, shivering, not from cold but from the weight of realization. Their hands hovered near each other, almost touching, yet neither dared close the gap. The warmth they had once shared had been replaced by a chasm of betrayal, fear, and impossibility. The city outside seemed indifferent, its pulse oblivious to the private apocalypse that had unfolded. But for Daniel and Emma, every sound, the distant hum of traffic, the clatter of a passing train, the muted chatter of hospital staff, was a reminder of the 12 hours that had changed everything. Each moment, each choice, each secret buried too long, had cascaded into catastrophe. Emma's mind replayed the day with agonizing clarity. She remembered the move-in, the nervous excitement, the subtle glances from neighbors, the lingering unease she had tried to ignore, the photograph on the shelf, the silence it had brought, the phone call from Daniel's mother that had ignited a chain reaction, all of it now seared into her memory. She remembered her own confessions, the trembling voice, the confrontation in the dark, and the chase through the rain-soaked streets. Every decision, every hesitation, every suppressed suspicion had contributed to the collapse. Daniel's memories were equally vivid, equally torturous. He remembered the first spark of unease, the photograph that had lodged itself in his mind, the gnawing suspicion that had driven him to search through her belongings. He remembered the argument at 2 a.m., the storm of words, the panic, and then the chase that had ended in blood and revelation. He had loved her, truly, but the love had been corrupted by circumstance and obsession, twisted by secrets that were never meant to surface. They had survived the chaos physically, but emotionally, they were fragments. Love had existed, yes, but it was a brittle thing now, shattered beyond repair. Betrayal, both real and perceived, had woven itself into every memory, leaving a tapestry of grief, confusion, and despair. And over it all loomed the knowledge that they were bound by blood, a cruel, immutable fact that no apology, no explanation could ever undo. The families, too, were left in ruin. Daniel's mother had faced the consequences of silence, her protective instincts and half-truths exposed to scrutiny and judgment. Emma's father, distant and defensive, could not escape the repercussions of his past indiscretions. The sins of the older generation had cascaded into the lives of the young, leaving devastation in their wake. The courtroom had formalized the damage, but it could not heal the wounds, nor could it reverse the emotional carnage. Outside the hospital, the sun began to rise, casting pale light over streets still wet from the night's storm. It should have signaled hope, a new beginning. But for Daniel and Emma, the daybreak only highlighted the loss. They were trapped in a world where love had collided violently with truth, where desire had met its impossible reflection in blood ties, and where family secrets had destroyed what could never be rebuilt. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low, hoarse, and fragile. It all happened so fast. 12 hours, and everything changed. 12 hours, and we're not who we were. Emma nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. It's like the world shifted under our feet. We tried to hold on, but some things can't be fixed. Some truths can't be escaped. They sat in silence, the weight of those 12 hours pressing down on them. The city outside moved on, unaware of the private tragedy within its walls. No one else would ever understand the speed, the intensity, the sheer magnitude of what had unfolded. No one would know how quickly love had been twisted into something unbearable, how trust had collapsed under the weight of hidden truths, how lives had been irreversibly altered in less than half a day. In that silence, both Daniel and Emma understood the cruel lesson that fate had carved into their lives. Some encounters, some truths, and some secrets have the power to unravel everything in an instant. They had loved each other, yes, but the world they had entered together had been built on lies and silences, and the cost of uncovering those truths had been devastating. As they were wheeled from the hospital room, Daniel still weak, Emma still trembling, the reality settled over them with inexorable finality. They had survived, but the price had been the destruction of their connection, the obliteration of hope, the transformation of what should have been a story of love into a chronicle of tragedy. 12 hours. A single day that had begun with laughter and warmth had escalated through fear and revelation, and had ended in pain, blood, and irrevocable truth. Time, which normally brought clarity and comfort, had only magnified the consequences. And so, as they emerged into the pale morning light, Chicago continued its indifferent rhythm around them. Horns honked, pedestrians hurried by, streetlights flickered, and life went on. But for Daniel and Emma, the story had ended. 12 hours after she moved in, after secrets were revealed, after love and blood collided, leaving only the echoes of what could have been and the haunting weight of what could never be undone.